Okay. Thank you, Maya. Okay, now to introduce our guest, Jonathan Kuttab, Executive Director of Friends of Sabeel North America, better known as FOSNA. In addition to being a co-founder of Sabeel Jerusalem, Jonathan is a co-founder of the Palestinian human rights group El Haq and co-founder of Nonviolence International. A well-known international human rights attorney, Jonathan practices in the US, Palestine, and Israel. He serves on the board of Bethlehem Bible College and is president of the board of Holy Land Trust. Jonathan is a resident of East Jerusalem and is a partner of Kuttab, Khoury, and Hana law firm in East Jerusalem. He is the author of Beyond the Two-State Solution, suggesting that any solution be predicated on the basic existential needs of the two parties. And Jonathan has placed the link to that book in our chat. Jonathan, I don't know how in the world you have found the time to be with us this morning with all that you do, but nevertheless, we are very grateful. Please give Jonathan a warm Zoom welcome. Jonathan?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate all of you who have come on a Saturday instead of sleeping in or going out. But this is, in fact, a very important issue for us to address. I'm also informed that this is a very informed audience, so I don't have to start from the very beginning. You are well aware of the situation. And I want to start by saying that for those who are interested in any form of peace or reconciliation or justice or an end to the horrible situation back home, we are in a situation of crisis. There seems to be a paralysis, a total paralysis. People don't know what to do. People don't see any horizon, any hope. There are no talks taking place. There is nothing to look forward to. People seem to have given up. In Israel, the expression is "ein ma lasot." There's nothing to do. On the negative side, on another even worse side, there is a feeling among many Israelis and Zionist supporters that they've won. There's nothing to do. You know what better do we want? We have everything we need. We are in total control of the situation. We can even have normalization with the Arab world. We don't even need the Palestinians. We have enough levers of power locally, regionally, and internationally to ensure that the situation will continue in our favor as long as we want. In fact, if anything, we are on the ascendancy. We are making life difficult for anybody who tries to oppose us. We are promoting a new definition of anti-Semitism, the IHRA definition, and getting that legislated all over the place so that any opposition to Israeli continued domination is going to be considered anti-Semitic, and we can make life hell for those who try to oppose us. BDS, we can even legislate to make it no longer possible for people to even try to boycott or sanction or divest from Israel. The feeling is triumph. We've got it. It's done. We've won. Now, of course, it's a very, very short-sighted view, as you can imagine. But the question is, what do we do? Where do we go from here? I strongly believe that the two-state solution, which for many years I've worked very hard to try and implement, even before it became the sort of accepted holy grail of where do we go, that is no longer going to happen. It's not very clear. It is not going to happen. So what do we do next? A friend of mine from Canada 10 years ago told me that. He says he tells his Israeli friends and their supporters, congratulations, guys, you won. There's not going to be a Palestinian state. Now what? Now what? So in an attempt to think out of the box, in an attempt to break out of this paralysis, I wrote this book, Beyond the Two-State Solution. You can download it for free. You can order it from Amazon if you wish, if you want to have the actual book, or you can download it for free from the Nonviolence International website. It's in the chat box. The second thing after the Minnesota Divest Now. Basically, here's what I say, and I genuinely welcome discussion of it, even critique of it by any of you. Basically, it says that Zionism, which promises or tries to get a Jewish state, as Jewish as France is French, and Palestinian nationalism, which says Palestine Arabiya, Palestine is Arab. Each of these two ideologies are at loggerheads. They are caught in a zero-sum situation. Every additional dunam or acre of land that's gained by one side is lost by the other. Every additional person who immigrates or emigrates or is born or is killed somehow addresses the demographic situation and gives advantage to one side over the other. These two ideologies promise something to their groups. And I want to make it clear, I am not suggesting at all that there is an equivalency between the two, moral or historical or legal. I'm just saying this is it. This is what is out there. In the land of Israel or Palestine today, there's two groups of people, roughly 7 million each. One group has all the power and one group has none. But neither group can get rid of the other at all. Certainly not by military means and certainly not by other means. And I will address this to anybody who's listening to this who is Zionist, who is committed to the idea of a Jewish state. And I'll tell them, look, with every possible advantage on your side, you have failed. Palestinians continue to exist and continue to see themselves as a national group, and they're going nowhere. And you really don't have anymore the option of ethnic cleansing. It's no longer possible. We will continue to exist and we will continue to call ourselves Palestinians, and we will continue to think of this as our land. Dividing it in two has failed, largely because the settlement movement has moved 700,000 Jews into the area that was slated to be a Palestinian Arab state, 22% of the state. And the state of Israel has now become more blatantly exclusivist and racist and discriminatory, insisting that only Jews have the right of self-determination. Israel is a Jewish state. It's for the Jewish people, totally. So that whether you're in the Galilee or in the Negev or in East Jerusalem or in the West Bank, as a Jew, you are the lords and masters. This is your land. So what do we do? Where do we go from here? Can we think outside the box? Is it possible? I claim it is. I claim that a very carefully prepared hybrid form of government can address the needs of both sides and can give them everything that their ideologies promises, except for exclusivity. In other words, you can have a state that's Jewish, but not exclusively Jewish. And you can say Palestine Arabiya, but it's not only Arab, it's also Jewish. Now, this as a theoretical construct is one thing, and to implement it on the ground is another. But let's start with it as a theoretical concept. I think it can be an even better Jewish state if it's not exclusively Jewish. And it can even be a better Arab state if it's not exclusively Arab. That somehow the new hybrid can fulfill the desires of both sides better than their exclusive nationalisms provide. Now, how do you go there? How do you move there? That we can also talk about. And I don't mind discussions in that vein, even though the book itself primarily deals with this as a theoretical concept, as a vision to be approached, to be fought for, to be struggled towards, that instead of negating the other, instead of delegitimizing, demonizing, criminalizing, disenfranchising the other, that it embraces and brings it together and think of a new idea. Now this is radical and it's not easy, but it's a vision that I think is worth going after. Now, there are certain obstacles that I try to address. The first, of course, is the crazy idea of demography. Wait a minute. If this new entity is going to be democratic, which we both want it to be, then whoever has 51% can dictate to the other. But that's not what democracy is all about. Democracy is not just 51% totally eliminates the other. You have to find a way to incorporate, to legitimize all the stakeholders, and I mean substantial groups. And if you do it right, it doesn't matter who has 60% and who has 40%, because the rights of both are met through a constitutional arrangement, through structures that guarantee the rights of both sides and the interests of both sides, regardless of who happens to be in the majority at a particular time. I also try to address the issue of security and the issue, what I would call the Holocaust Syndrome. The fact that people like the Jewish people who have gone through millennia of anti-Semitism and who have recently gone through genocide, and who themselves feel that they are in a hostile environment where the Arab world and the Palestinians have been fighting them basically for the last 100 years. They feel they can't leave their security in anybody else's hands. They need to have control of the security apparatus. How can you square that with a hybrid form of government that is genuinely addresses the interests of both? So I have a couple of creative ways for dealing with that, that give actually Jews a little bit of an advantage. The first is I posit that the main positions, the head of the army, navy, air force, nuclear, arsenal, and the defense ministry will always be a Jewish person with an Arab deputy. All other positions in the armed forces will be on the basis of merit. And anybody who doesn't want to fight, God bless them, don't have to fight. They can do national service. But at the same time, the head of the police will always be a Palestinian Arab with a Jewish deputy. This way we sort of address the fears of Jews being in the midst of an Arab milieu, and at the same time you address the fears of the Arabs who have suffered for a long time at the hands of the Shin Bet and the police and the border patrol and the internal security mechanism. A second idea, which I thought was a good one, and I hope people all over the world will find it attractive, is that 10% of the defense budget will always be dedicated to genuine peacemaking, towards understanding the culture, the language of the other side, towards joint projects, towards activities that remove the hostility, the mistrust, and the hatred that provides the biggest risk to the security of Jewish Israelis today. Jewish Israelis today don't have to worry about Iran or the Arab armies, or they have to worry about Palestinians, a 12-year-old schoolgirl with a pair of scissors in her pocket who wants to just stab somebody and doesn't care. That's the biggest risk to Israeli Jews today. How do you address that? You address that security need by dealing with the causes of hatred, mistrust, and animosity. So this is what I opined. This is what I tried to imagine. And then, of course, we have how do you move towards that idea. Right now, it is important for us to start thinking creatively, but also working together. You see, one problem that we run into is that the other side has given peace and coexistence a bad name, because they have conflated it with acceptance of the status quo and normalization of a situation that should not be tolerated, much less normalized. So we need to create new mechanisms for co-resistance rather than coexistence. We need to say it's wonderful to come and sing Kumbaya, one verse in Hebrew and one verse in Arabic, but that's not peace. We need to find activities where we join together against hatred, against racism, against discrimination, against obsessive national exclusivity on both sides, This is why, I'm dedicated to nonviolence personally. But every time I hear people advising Palestinians to nonviolence, I get very upset. Why don't you advise the other side to use nonviolence, to stop relying on military might as the way to achieve peace? Because unless you are willing to say that there's a better way forward than through violence, and unless you're willing to say that to both sides, all you're saying is whoever has the power will keep the power and the military power, and the other side will just have to find a way to acquiesce and deal with it, which I cannot accept or tolerate. So this is my idea. How do we move forward? How do we find new ways of working together for peace and for reconciliation? How can we find, and I say this, and I say, I'm willing to say this and discuss this, not just with good, decent people who are Peace Now and Jewish Voice for Peace and other wonderful allies, but even with diehard Zionist, even right-wing people. I'm willing to sit with them and say, okay, let's talk. Let's move things together. What are you going to do? Are you going to accept forever an apartheid situation? And if not, what are you suggesting? What are you offering? Gantz, after he went and hit Gaza recently, told the Palestinians, there's a better way. Why don't you follow the Abrahamic Accords? Give me a break. What Abrahamic Accords? Give up Jerusalem, give up the right of return, give up any opposition to settlements, give up everything, and we'll give you a few crumbs of economic benefits. We'll give you a few more permits to come and work in Israel, and we'll allow you a little bit more ease of movement between and among your areas, and under our control, of course, as long as you. This is not an offer. This is a continued system of rule and basically apartheid. One group has the power and the other simply has to submit to it at great risk if they would try to oppose it. So this is a new conversation that we need to take. Part of the problem is that to move in that direction, we must be willing to abandon the mirage of a two-state solution. A genuine two-state solution would basically require the uprooting of all the settlements, or most of them. But we know that you can't do that. We couldn't even uproot a few hundred families from the heart of Hebron. And the uprooting of the settlements in Gaza was such a traumatic experience that it foreclosed the possibility of further withdrawals. So to remove even 100,000 settlers from the West Bank is just not going to happen, and will not solve the problem. Because in the heart of hearts, these Jewish settlers say, this is as legitimate as Haifa and Jaffa. This is ours, either because God gave it to us, or Balfour, or history, or our need, or our military might gave us this land as much as it gave us the state of Israel itself. So if this is not legitimate, then neither is Israel itself. On the other hand, Palestinians feel that this is all Palestine. I don't want to just limit myself to Ramallah and Hebron. I still have roots and history and land and property and houses. I still have the key to the house, many Palestinians will say, and I see somebody else living in it. If it's in Katamon or in West Jerusalem or in Jaffa or in Haifa, who are you to tell me that that's not my land and that's not my property? So, in a way, the two-state solution was a pragmatic attempt at a compromise, which failed. And it failed largely because the other side has undermined it systematically. Governments from the right to the left, from Labour to Likud, everybody continued with settlements throughout the occupied territories. Today, the two-state solution is an alibi for doing nothing, for having no solution. Somebody asked about the right of return. Yes, of course, Palestinians should have the right of return. How can Jews imagine that they can come back after 2,000 years? And Palestinians can't come back to homes that they remember within living memory, to houses for which they have keys. I mean, why shouldn't Palestinians be allowed the right of return? Not all of them will exercise that right, of course, just like not all Jews will immigrate to Israel, but those who wish should have that right. And those who wish to accept compensation should be allowed to take that. And those who want to join families, right now they don't even have the right to visit, to even enter, much less return. Why shouldn't they be allowed? Or you say demography. By saying demography, you are saying that Zionism could not have worked without kicking out those people, that it was necessary to kick them out and keep them out. And I'm saying, no, we can both share the land. we should have the right of return, just like Jews insist on a right of return as part of the constitution or part of the essence of the state of Israel, that any Jew who feels like it can come and live in Israel. So any Palestinian who feels like it should be allowed to come and live in Palestine. Yes, right of return is one of the requirements, I think, for both groups. And it can be accommodated. Most Palestinians will probably not want to exercise that right, but all Palestinians will insist that they do have that right and should be allowed to exercise it if they choose. And it can be done unless you hang on to the idea of exclusivity, unless you hang on to the idea that this is a race to see who has more people to vote for them. You know, it's funny. There is nothing to say that Arabs should vote for Arabs and Jews should vote for Jews. Look at the United States. I'm in the state of Pennsylvania, and there's a supposed Muslim called Dr. Oz, Mehmet Oz, who is running. I wouldn't vote for him in 100 years. I don't know any Muslim who will vote for him. But you get somebody like Bernie Sanders, who has the entire Muslim community voting for him, and he is Jewish. So people would and should vote on a number of issues, not just on your ethnic identity. So I see I'm taking a lot maybe of time, but I wanted to set up the framework and invite a discussion. And frankly, I invite negative comments as much as I invite positive comments. What is wrong with the vision that I have laid out? How can we move towards it? Is it impossible? Is it idealistic? Is it too idealistic? Is it unrealistic? Can it happen? If not, what are the obstacles to it? And I can think of a number of obstacles right now to make it possible or to make it realistic. One of the greatest obstacles is the imbalance of power. The fact that one side has all the power and the other side doesn't. So why should the powerful give up their privileges? In history, most oppressive, privileged groups don't give up their privileges easily. Without a lot of pressure, external or internal, they don't voluntarily wake up one morning and say, this is really not nice, we should end slavery. This is really not nice, we should give women the vote. This is really not nice, we should have equality. Because for those who have privilege, the minute you use the word equality, you are threatening their status, you're threatening their property, you're threatening their privilege. So right now we have a situation where there's such a huge imbalance of power between the two. What most Israelis says, why should we? Why should we? Why should we give up anything? Yeah, we want peace. Of course we want peace. Yeah. And we'll make painful concessions. Yeah. But why should we? So there is, that is probably one of the biggest obstacles to peace right now, is that Palestinians are too weak. Palestinians are too weak. And the power imbalance needs to be addressed somehow. Another obstacle, as I mentioned, is the Holocaust Syndrome. The fact that with no amount of power on Israel's side is going to be sufficient. They're going to need more and more and more because they're afraid, and they're genuinely afraid. And how do you address that without making them even more afraid by demanding that they make concessions or that they move towards equality? Yeah, it is a problem. So shall we look to some of the questions in the question and answer? Are you going to mediate them and somebody will read them to me, or do
Yes,
I?
Jonathan, I have to apologize. Someone is mowing the lawn behind me. Hold on, I'm going to close a window. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Okay. Two other questions are of the same topic, and that is whether you will speak to the recent raid at the offices of El Haq.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. As you know, I'm one of the founders of Al Haq, and Al Haq is one of the. I'm very proud. It's one of the really genuine human rights organizations that has worked very hard to maintain its independence and professionalism and accuracy and credibility, and that has been willing to critique not only Israel, but also the Palestinian Authority and Hamas whenever they have violated the principles of human rights. Now, Israel has sort of maintained a strange relationship with Al-Haq and other civil society organizations. At one point, they thought that they were a nice counterbalance to the political groups or to the PLO. At another time, they thought that they could control them through laws and military orders that governs their structures or that governs their funding. The fact that they would label an organization terrorist organization is of course facetious. In fact, if anything, it hurt the Palestinian Authority more than it hurt these organizations, because the Palestinian Authority is supposed to be doing something about terrorism, and if these terrorist organizations are operating under its auspices within Area A and they don't do anything about it, then they're not doing their job. I understand that the PA has asked the Europeans and the Americans, please send us security officials to study this secret evidence that Israel supposedly has, that these organizations are terrorist. The Europeans came and said, there's nothing there. And the Americans said, there's nothing there. So these are, apart from the fact that this is a nice political move for Gantz to make before the elections to show that he is tough, it also shows something else. Israel cannot, in fact, continue to rule the Palestinians without becoming increasingly more oppressive, increasingly more harsh, increasingly more fascist. It cannot rule the Palestinians and at the same time allow a vibrant civil society to exist. So they have to come in and they have to push and they have to. I'm very proud that Al-Haq the very next day took out the welded door and resumed working. And I'm proud that there is an international outcry against Israel's labeling of these organizations and attempts to close them down. And it's not just the 6 organizations. Other organizations feel the same kind of pressure from the Israelis and sometimes from the Palestinian Authority itself, which has closed down a number of charitable organizations because they were supposedly associated with Hamas or associated with some of their enemies as well. I believe in civil society. I believe in an open and democratic society. I believe that those organizations, whatever their political orientation is, as long as they're involved in humanitarian, social, educational, human rights work, should be allowed to operate. I believe in an open and free society. You cannot stifle a people without being harsher and more oppressive and more fascist. And this is what we see.
Before we leave that topic, I think it might be a good idea to explain to our audience what El-Haq, what the mission of El-Haq is.
Okay, Al-Haq was created back in 1979, dedicated to human rights and the rule of law. These are its twin mantras. It largely does documentation of human rights violation and promotes respect for international law and human rights. At a time when almost every other organization was sort of affiliated with one political group or the other, we worked very hard to keep it neutral and to keep it objective and to collect documents and documentation of human rights violation and educate people as to what human rights are and what an international legal system should look like. And maybe this is what really upset the Israelis most, because we were preparing files to present before the International Criminal Court, because we wanted Israel to be held responsible, and specific generals and specific governors and specific army people as well as settlers to be brought to justice internationally. And Israel didn't like that, and they tried more than once to shut us down and to raid the offices and even threaten lawyers who were working for Al-Haq to try and bring our issues before the International Criminal Court. Al-Haq has received more than 45 international prizes for the good work that it does professionally for the rule of law and for international law.
And am I correct? I believe I read that the US also terms that a terrorist organization.
Al-Haq? No. The Israelis are trying to pressure the US to do so, and the US says there's nothing there for us to do that.
Okay, so okay, I must.
They have labeled PFLP a terrorist organization.
Okay, thank you. Where do you see the seeds of your vision now being planted so they can grow, both in Israel and in Palestine? And this commenter also says, love your humor, a saving grace. No need to respond to the latter.
Well, okay. Right now, this idea of a single state that is genuinely democratic, that addresses the needs of both, is very much a minority idea. Among Palestinians, the reason it's a minority is because we have been badgered into abandoning the idea of a secular democratic state. We have been told if you speak one state, it means you don't accept Israel as a Jewish state. It means you're almost calling for throwing the Jews in the sea and a second Holocaust, and God forbid. There's no discussion with you. If you talk one state, there's no discussion. Talk two states, then there's something to talk about. So the PLO and Fatah accepted this, and they say, okay, we'll talk two states and we'll accept a state in 22% of Palestine, and we'll even work towards it, and we'll change our charter, and we'll do what needs to be done to show, we'll even abandon the Palestinians who are Israeli citizens, and we won't talk too much about the right of return, and we'll even not act in East Jerusalem. We have been told not to speak one state. We have been told that to talk one state is to be radical and to be outside the discussion, that's taboo. And it's only as the two-state solution proved to be undoable, unworkable, that people are beginning to open up to the idea of one state. I also want to mention that there are some Palestinians who think one state, just you wait, we will have enough babies that we will become the majority. And once we are the majority, we'll do to you what you've been doing to us. That's not what I'm talking about. We need to address what I call the false understanding of democracy. Democracy doesn't mean that 51% has the right to oppress every minority. In any democracy, there have to be guarantees for the rights of minorities as well as for the rights of the individual against the oppressiveness of a majority. That's why you have a constitution, because you can't trust usually all the time the majority to do the right thing. Yes, the majority should rule, but there should be an overarching mechanism to control the excitement of an electorate who will follow some kind of demagogue and oppress the minorities. So for Palestinians, I think it's an easier sell to move towards such a vision. For many Jewish Israelis, I think some people will hark back to certain forms of Zionism that accepted the idea of a binational state in the very early days, the Had Ha'am and others. But for most Israeli Jews, this is not a possibility that they are contemplating, unless there is some real pressure, external or internal. I think most Israeli Jews, they think they won. They think they have it all. Why should they give up any of it?
I agree with that. I think in order for Israeli Jews to buy into this type of one-state solution, someone has to show them what they will gain, and that has not really been done. They only see what they will lose. That's
well, in my book, I try to argue that they can gain something. In fact, Jews can have more freedom in such a state. Certainly those who are not Orthodox. Right now, if you are not an Orthodox Jew, you don't have enough religious freedom in Israel. You can't even marry. That's why most Israelis go to Cyprus or New York to get married and come back, because they would not be allowed to marry under Israeli law. Israel has, the Zionist movement made a deal basically with Orthodox Jews that they will have exclusive control of rabbinical courts, and there is no civil law marriage in Israel. So if your name is Cohen, even the justice of the Supreme Court at that time couldn't marry the love of his life because she was a divorcee. And under Jewish halakhic law, being a Cohen, he needs to marry a virgin. He cannot marry a divorcee. So he couldn't marry her in Israel. And he's the chief justice of the Supreme Court. He had to go to New York, marry her, and bring her back in because there was no freedom for him in Israel to marry the one he loved. Instead, he had to marry her outside and bring her in under the Committee of Nations rule that if somebody's married somewhere else and comes to Israel, they're considered to be married. So yes, I would argue that Jews will have a better situation. I would also argue that Arabs would have a better situation than that which exists in some of the Arab countries. I wouldn't want to be in Saudi Arabia or Iraq or any of these other countries which are not democratic. Just because they're Arab is not enough for me. I'd like to live in a genuinely democratic society. And maybe with so many Israeli Jews there, we can forge a new society that is even more vibrant and that is even better for Jews and for Palestinians than the current situation.
I would like to live in a democratic society too. Another comment, I guess there is a question here too. I want accountability for Israel's atrocities. If the Western countries will not condemn Israel, surely there must be some organization that can take over and issue sanctions and do what is necessary to stop the ethnic cleansing of a whole ethnic group of people. Is there such an organization? And if not, can one be created?
I don't think it's a question of having an organization there as much as having a struggle. The struggle against slavery, the struggle for women's rights, the struggle against racism and discrimination is a continuing struggle. There are international organizations that can help. There is the concept of international solidarity. There are people in other countries who believe enough in these ideas that they will bring in some pressure and some resources and solidarity that joins in the struggle, but ultimately it's a struggle. We have to work and work hard to defeat those ideas and to, shall I say, approximate a better, a more humane, a less racist society, a more democratic society. And it's a continuing struggle. It's a continuing struggle, even in those countries that are democratic, to keep them democratic and to keep respect and to keep equality and to keep support for minority rights is a continuing, ongoing struggle that people of goodwill are involved in and should be involved in. I mean, colonialism didn't end because there was some outside organization that decided colonialism is bad, or slavery, or democracy. There are some good organizations that work for these things, but it takes a different understanding. We also need to strengthen international organizations that work for these things rather than denigrate them.
Thank you. Next question. How can we protect ourselves from those who will sue us at the drop of a hat just for expressing solidarity with Palestinians? The situation is ridiculously off the rails and totally incomprehensible. It does not even make sense.
Yes, it's actually, I look at it as a positive thing because it shows that the Palestinian struggle or the struggle for Palestinian rights is not only just for Palestinians. The other side is using tools which can be used against everybody. The anti-BDS legislation, for example, now is being used for gun rights. It's being used by the fossil fuel industry, trying to get people to sign that anybody who opposes the fossil fuel industry will get sued, will get persecuted, prosecuted. Yes, it's an ongoing struggle to support justice in Palestine today is again becoming a beacon. We need intersectionality. We need help from our brothers and sisters, from Native Americans, from the LGBTQ movement, from the environmental movement, the green movement, from those who are opposed to poverty and hunger, for those who are concerned about the environment and the climate change. We all need to work together. We can no longer just be cocooned in our own little issues or our own little struggles. We need to work together for a better world.
I couldn't agree more. I'm sure we all do. Next question, point and question. Joseph Avazar has been promoting the idea of an Israeli-Palestinian confederation. To the degree you are familiar with his proposal, what points of agreement and disagreement do you have?
One of the biggest disagreements I have with him, and I appeared on his show and I made that point to him, which means I will never be invited again, is that he starts with the assumption of a two-state solution. He treats the PA as the Palestinian government and Hamas as a second Palestinian government. And he says, well, can we talk as government to government? Can we come up with a federated parliament that rules? And he allows both Israel, the PA, and Hamas to have veto power over any new legislation. So he starts with the current status quo as legitimate. And tries to move beyond it and tries to create a confederation of two states or three political entities, because he also treats Gaza as a separate entity, even though it's Palestinian. So these are two of my biggest objections to him. But his general idea that we need to work with both sides. You cannot just have one side rule everybody else. This is the current society. Israel today and the Israeli Knesset rules the entire area of Palestine. The fact that they have, quote, withdrawn, actually redeployed around Gaza and keep it under siege, Gaza is still under Israeli control in every aspect of their life, from their currency to their population register, to bringing stuff in and out, to even to ruling day-to-day life. Israel controls. It controls sometimes through Hamas and sometimes directly, but it rules the Gaza Strip, and it rules the West Bank, obviously, including Area A, where they just moved in this last week, right to the heart of Area A, and closed and sealed offices of organizations to pretend that somehow the Palestinians have a state or a state in the making is I think, false. So yes, Israel continues to rule the entirety of the West Bank and Gaza.
Thank you. The participation of Palestinians with Israeli citizenship in Israeli elections usually falls far short of the percentage of Palestinian Israelis as a percentage of the total Israeli population. Is there a benefit to increased Palestinian Israeli participation in Israel's elections? Does election boycott send a stronger message, or is it counterproductive?
Well, Israel has managed to fragment the Palestinian population into 5 different categories and has set a number of rules for each category. The best, the top category is Palestinians who are Israeli citizens. They are told you are citizens, but this is not really your country. You can vote for the Knesset, but at least until very recently, you can't really participate in the political life of this country or be part of its government. Until recently, they wouldn't even allow them into any coalition. The last time their hatred of Bibi was such that they allowed them into a coalition, basically to keep Bibi out of power, but not to really give them a stake in the country. So some Palestinians says, I don't want to play. Under these rules, I don't want to play. I'll stay at home. Others say, I have to play because I need to play. It's funny, about 15% of the Palestinian Israeli citizens who voted used to vote for the religious party, the Zionist religious party. Why? Because that party usually controlled the Ministry of the Interior. And the Ministry of Interior was the only governmental body that could give you roads and schools and electrification for much of the Palestinian Arab villages, especially the ones who are not recognized by Israel. So if I want a school, if I want a road, if I want something, I have to vote. I'll even vote for the Zionist religious party because they're the ones who can give me a school or a road, or, you know, and others would say, nonsense, I'm not going to vote. Others would say, if I vote for Meretz or Labor, I'll be just throwing away my vote. So what's the point? I don't know. It's an issue for them to decide, I suppose. But I usually prefer engagement to boycotting, personally.
At least boycotting the Knesset. How do we solve the suffocating control of the US Congress and administration that gives Israel impunity as well as financial support?
Well, that is another important issue, because if my audience is Americans, you know that the influence of money in politics is destroying American democracy, not just for Israel and Palestine, but for everything. The cost of running for office is such. I mean, a presidential campaign will cost you $2 to $5 billion. Who has $2 to $5 billion? I mean, you can be the most progressive person in the world. If you have to raise billions of dollars just to run for election, it means you're going to be beholden to whoever gives you these $2 to $5 billion. So the influence of money in US politics is totally corrosive of American democracy, and it needs to be addressed. Right now, the influence of AIPAC and its other agencies is such that even the views of American Jews are not valued as much as the money of a few Jewish billionaires, Adelson, even Soros and others, who would just take one issue and pour billions of dollars into the political system and force a situation where Congress no longer reflects the desires of its constituency. It reflects the desires of its donors. That is so corrosive for American democracy that it's a problem not just for Palestinians and Israelis who are concerned with peace, but for anybody who is concerned with democratic values that are not run by the 1%, by the very, very powerful people. We need to fight against Citizens United. We need to fight against these super PACs where you don't even know who is contributing. There used to be some legislation limiting how much you would contribute to political campaigns and political candidates, but that has been totally circumvented by these super PACs that can take millions of dollars without any transparency, and that have been really influencing, if not determining, political elections the last few years. This is a fight that Americans, all Americans, need to be involved in to get money out of their politics.
Thank you. I think your one-state solution is the only realistic way forward from this attendee. Do you see it happening within the next 10 to 50 years?
50 years is a very long time. But yes, I am certain it will happen. I'm as certain of eventual victory as people in South Africa were certain that apartheid would fall. People under every oppressive regime somehow feel that that regime will fall. even though it doesn't look that way at the moment. It looks so powerful, it looks so invincible, and yet within weeks or months, the Berlin Wall would fall, Hosni Mubarak would fall, different oppressors and oppressive regimes fall. One has to have faith that ultimately justice will prevail. So yes, I think it will change. And I hope that it changes in a peaceful way. I hope that it changes in a way that benefits both Israeli Jews and Palestinians, rather than like Ceausescu in Romania, where it was a bloody end to that regime.
Thank you. Please address Mahmoud Abbas's comments this week. Is it helpful to use the Holocaust as a hot button?
No, it's not. Obviously, it's not. And I don't defend Mahmoud Abbas at any level. But I think what he was saying basically was partly hyperbole, partly because as Judaism teaches and Islam teaches, and as every oppressed person believes, you kill one person, you've killed the whole world. And so he's saying, we feel the oppression. You know, you have your Holocaust, we have 50 Holocausts. Obviously, it's not helpful. And the other side jumped on it. That was beautiful. They're off the hook now. The fact that they killed 47 people in Gaza in a totally unprovoked, initiated action becomes irrelevant. Because look at what he's saying. He's denying the Holocaust. Well, he apologized and he pulled that back. I don't think it was helpful to begin with, but I think dwelling on it too much is also not helpful. It sort of provides justification. See. They hate us. Look what their leader has said. I don't think of Mahmoud Abbas as my leader at all. And I think most Palestinians feel the same way.
And yet there he is.
There he is. It's funny that the Israelis won't even talk to him. It's like, you wanted somebody who dressed in a suit instead of a fatigues. You wanted somebody who shaves every day, unlike Arafat. You want somebody who talks about peace all the time, doesn't talk about the gun. You want somebody who's accommodating, who goes along to the point where it becomes yuck. Really.
Yuck is right. This is the final comment followed by a question. Your approach is laudable. I totally agree that sharing the land is the only long-time solution. Actually, I'm going to ask one more question after this. So, however, the main problem is Zionism, which is racist and equates apartheid as has demonstrated. So unless the Israelis drop Zionism, they won't accept it. And if they drop Zionism and the apartheid state, why would they stay? So like you said, why would they accept it? And maybe that's more rhetorical than it is a question.
Well, it's important, and I want to address it. I deliberately avoided going into Zionism racism. Not because I don't have a view on it. Of course I do. And in other situations, I have expressed that view very emphatically. I don't think it's a good idea to have a state that is Jewish or Christian or Muslim. I think it's necessarily discriminatory and racist and oppressive to others who are not of that category, or even of those who are of that category but who prefer to be French or American or Algerian or whatever. But I find that kind of discussion not to be too helpful. I just turn around and say, okay, you're there. I'm not going to go into all the history of Zionism and oppressiveness. What are you going to do now? How can you move forward? If I accept that you are here, can I accept you as an equal rather than as a lord and master? And will you accept me as an equal rather than illegitimate natives who are fifth column and not really desired in this country? There is something very pragmatic about it. There is something very accommodating. The reality is that Israelis have created a new reality in the Middle East. They have created a state. They have created an army. They have created many industries. They have created a new reality. And we cannot just turn the clock back and say, you don't belong. Go back to wherever you came from. The question is, can you live life here with me as your equal? Can we form a partnership? Can we have a better future together? And I'm saying we can, and we should, and we should. Now, will you accept that? Will you accept that, or will you say, no, I prefer apartheid? It's fine. I will tolerate you as long as you know your place, as long as you accept that this is my land, not yours. I will allow you to stay, and I'll allow you to work, and I'll give you a few benefits here and there. But this is my state, and you have to recognize it as my land, as only Jewish, exclusively Jewish. And I say, no, I don't accept that. Sorry. We have to live together. We have to find a formula to live together. You don't have to accept my narrative. I don't have to accept your narrative. But we can really live together as equals. This is at least my vision. This is my hope. This is what I can work towards, and I invite you to join me.
I think it's the vision of those of us progressives here in this country as well. We have to learn to live together, all of us. It's a universal need, as it were. That concludes our questions, and we thank all of you who asked the questions. They were, as always, very cogent and thoughtful, and we appreciate your participation, as I'm sure Jonathan does as well. Thank you, Jonathan. You have raised very good reasons why a two-state solution is no longer viable, and how we get to the next step. So we thank you for that. A reminder to complete the very short evaluation that is found in the chat sidebar. And as always, today's forum recording will be posted on our mepn.org website. So wait for that. It might be a little bit, I don't know when it will be posted, not tomorrow, but it will be posted. And if you are new to MEPN forums and like what you see and hear, please consider becoming a member through donation and or our yearly dues. Actually, any donation now makes you a member. A link has been posted in the chat for you to give this way via givemn.org, or you may give directly by sending your check to MEPN. And you can find that address on mepn.org. On behalf of the board, we thank you for your support. We certainly thank Jonathan one more time. Jonathan, your schedule is incredible, and I just can't thank you enough for your participation and leading today. We look forward to see you at future forums, certainly with Mariam Barghouti next month, and hopefully at the September 7th picnic. Thank you all. I'll leave this open for a little while for the people to review the items in the chat.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody who has showed up, and thank you for all your efforts.
Thank you.